There's this idea in America that if you do everything right, you'll eventually make it. Go to college, get a degree, work hard, climb the ladder, and one day you'll be comfortable. Not rich, just stable. A house, some savings. Maybe kids if you want them. The middle class. That's what I believed. I'm in my mid-20s. I did the whole path. Student loans, internships, unpaid overtime, networking, grinding through school while working part-time. I landed a corporate job. Decent salary on paper. Benefits. The thing everyone said would finally make life easier. And somehow I'm still broke. Not broke like reckless spending broke. Broke like rent eats half my paycheck. Groceries cost twice what they used to. Student loans feel like a second rent payment. One emergency would wipe me out. I save what I can, and it barely moves the needle. And the more I started running the numbers, the more I realized something uncomfortable. It's not that Gen Z isn't working hard enough. The math just doesn't work anymore. Not for the middle class we were promised. And I'm going to prove it to you with real numbers, not vibes, not complaints, not doomer energy. Just the actual cost of living now versus what people earn. Because once you see it laid out, you realize this isn't a motivation problem. It's a structural one. Let's start with the biggest expense that defines the middle class, housing. My parents bought their first home in their late 20s. Nothing fancy. A normal suburban house. Their mortgage was around 3 times my dad's annual salary. That was pretty standard in the 90s. 3 times income. Today, the median home price in the U.S. is hovering around $400,000. The median Gen Z income for people in their early to mid-20s is roughly $40,000 to $45,000. That's almost 9 to 10 times income. Even if you're doing well for Gen Z and making $60,000, you're still looking at 6 to 7 times income. Historically, anything above 4 times income is considered unaffordable. So right out of the gate, home ownership, the backbone of middle-class wealth, is mathematically out of reach for most of us. And that's before interest rates. At today's rates, a $400K home with a normal down payment can easily run you $2,500 to $3,000 a month. That's more than most Gen Z take home after taxes. So the solution becomes rent. Except rent has exploded too. In many cities, a basic one-bedroom apartment now costs $1,800 to $2,500 a month. In some places, even more. And wages didn't double to match that. So instead of building equity like previous generations, we're sending half our income to landlords every month just to exist. That alone breaks the middle-class formula. But it doesn't stop there. Let's talk about college. The thing we were told was the golden ticket. The average student loan debt for Gen Z grads is around $30,000 to $40,000, some way higher. Monthly payments can easily be $300 to $600 depending on your plan. That's not buying assets. That's negative wealth. Previous generations could often work part-time in college and graduate with little or no debt. Tuition was a fraction of today's cost compared to wages. Now, tuition has increased over 200% while wages barely move. So we start adulthood behind. Then there's transportation. Most of us can't live close to work because rent is too expensive, so we commute. Which usually means a car. Between car payments, insurance, gas, maintenance, and repairs, the average cost of owning a car is now close to $1,000 a month. That's insane. But for most cities, it's not optional. That's another middle-class drain. Now add groceries. Food prices are up roughly 25 to 30% in just a few years. What used to cost $80 now costs $120, and eating healthy is even more expensive. Utilities are up. Internet, phone plans, subscriptions, healthcare premiums, co-pays, everything rose, except pay. When you stack it all together, the typical Gen Z monthly budget looks something like this. Rent, $1,800 to $2,500. Student loans, $300 to $600. Car costs, $700 to $1,000. Food, $400 to $600 utilities and essentials. 300 to 500. You're already at $3,500 to $5,000 a month. That's $42,000 to $60,000 a year after taxes. Most Gen Z don't even make that before taxes. So what happens? No savings, no investing, no home ownership, just survival. And that's why the middle class is disappearing for our generation. Not because we're lazy, not because we're bad with money, but because the basic cost of life grew faster than income for 40 years straight. The old formula was simple. Work full-time gives afford housing, gives save, gives invest, gives slowly build stability. Now the formula is work full-time gives barely cover expenses, gives pray nothing goes wrong. And if one thing does go wrong, medical bill, car breakdown, job layoff, you go into debt. This is a personal failure. It's broken math. And in the next part, I'm going to show you how this gap keeps widening every single year, why raises don't fix it, and how inflation quietly erased the middle class in real time without most people even realizing it. Now here's where a lot of people push back and say, okay, but won't salaries eventually catch up? Don't wages rise over time? Isn't this just a rough period? That's what I thought too. Until I looked at what actually happened to wages compared to the cost of living. Adjusted for inflation, most workers in America have barely seen real wage growth since the late 1970s. Productivity exploded, companies became more profitable than ever. CEOs made exponentially more, but regular workers' pay mostly flatlined. Meanwhile, housing costs went up over 200%. College tuition went up over 300%. Healthcare costs skyrocketed. Childcare exploded. Rent doubled in many cities. So even when you get a raise, it doesn't actually move you forward. Let's say you make $45,000 a year and your company gives you a generous 5% raise. That's about $2,250 more before tax. After tax, maybe $1,600. Sounds good, right? Except rent goes up $150 a month. That's $1,800 a year gone instantly. Groceries cost more. Insurance premiums go up. Utilities rise. Gas rises. That raise disappears without improving your life at all. You're running faster just to stay in the same place. This is what people mean when they say inflation is a silent tax. And Gen Z entered the workforce during one of the worst inflation spikes in decades. So even those of us who did get decent starting salaries immediately watched our purchasing power shrink. Now, let's talk about something nobody mentions when they give financial advice. Taxes and deductions. When older generations talk about what they made at 25, they're usually talking about gross pay. But the real number that matters is take-home pay. Between federal tax, state tax, Social Security, Medicare, health insurance premiums, retirement deductions, if you're lucky enough to have a 401k, a $60,000 salary can easily turn into $3,500 a month in your bank account, sometimes less. So when you hear, just make $60,000 and you'll be fine, that advice is stuck in a different era. Because $3,500 a month today barely covers rent and basic living in a lot of places. And remember, that's considered a good salary for Gen Z. Now here's another thing that quietly killed the middle class. Assets. Previous generations built wealth by owning things that went up in value. Houses, stocks, even pensions. But Gen Z is locked out of most of those. We can't afford homes. Many companies eliminated pensions. And most of us don't have spare money to invest meaningful amounts. So while rent drains us every month, homeowners are building equity. While we struggle to save $200, wealthy families invest thousands and watch it compound. This creates a wealth gap that widens automatically, not because anyone is smarter, just because they had access to assets. Let me show you how extreme this is. If someone invests $500 a month starting in their early 20s at an average return of 8%, they can have over $1.5 million by retirement. If someone can only invest $50 a month, they end up with about $150,000. Same time, same market. Massively different outcome. And most Gen Z are closer to zero than 500. Not because they don't want to invest. Because there's nothing left after bills. Now add debt into the picture. Student loans, credit cards, medical bills, auto loans. Debt doesn't just cost you money. It steals your future money. When you're paying 20% interest on a credit card, every dollar you send isn't building wealth. It's feeding the system. And when emergencies hit, which they always do, debt becomes the only option. This traps people in cycles that are almost impossible to escape. So while older generations could save first and borrow second, Gen Z often borrows first just to survive, and then tries to save later, which rarely works. Now here's where the math gets truly depressing. Let's say you somehow manage to save $500 a month, which is extremely hard for most Gen Z. That's $6,000 a year. Even if you do that for 10 straight years, you'll only have $60,000. Meanwhile, home prices might rise another $100,000 or more in that same time. So the goal keeps moving away faster than you can chase it. It feels like progress, but it isn't. This is why so many people feel stuck even when they're doing everything right. Because the ladder is being pulled up faster than they can climb. And none of this even factors in having kids, supporting family, medical emergencies, layoffs, recessions, or burnout, which are all part of real life. The middle class used to be built on stability, predictable expenses, rising wages, affordable housing, access to assets. Now Gen Z gets volatile prices, stagnant wages, massive debt, and no asset access. That's not a temporary phase. That's a different economic system. And in the next part, I'm going to show you exactly who benefited from this shift, how corporations and policy quietly moved money upward for decades, and why this wasn't an accident. So if wages didn't keep up, assets became unreachable, and debt became normal, the question becomes, where did all that money go? Because it didn't disappear. It just moved. Over the last 40 years, the share of wealth owned by the top 10% in America exploded. Today, they control over 70% of total wealth. The bottom half of the country owns barely 2%. That didn't happen by accident. It happened through a slow shift in how the economy rewards people. Corporations stopped sharing profits with workers through rising wages and pensions, and started funneling them to executives and shareholders. Productivity kept rising. Workers produced more per hour than ever before. But instead of pay increasing with that productivity like it used to, almost all the gains went to the top. So Gen Z is working in the most productive economy in human history, and getting paid like it's 1980. At the same time, the costs of basic life were quietly financialized. Housing stopped being primarily a place to live and became an investment vehicle. Private equity firms started buying single-family homes in bulk. Corporations entered the rental market. Investors treated housing like stocks. When investors compete with normal families, prices explode. That's exactly what happened. So now, instead of buying homes, Gen Z rents from companies whose entire business model is maximizing monthly payments, which means higher rent, more fees, fewer repairs, and constant increases. Your rent going up isn't bad luck. It's a business strategy. Healthcare went the same direction. What used to be a public service in many countries became a profit-driven industry in the U.S. Insurance companies, hospital chains, pharmaceutical companies, all extracting revenue at every step. So Gen Z pays more for worse care than almost any other developed country. College, too, once heavily subsidized, now run like a business. Tuition rises every year not because education got better, but because students can borrow more. Easy loans created unlimited demand. And schools raise prices accordingly, which means Gen Z pays for decades for a degree that used to be affordable. This is what happens when basic life necessities turn into profit centers. Every rent payment, every medical bill, every loan interest charge, it all flows upward. Now let's talk about something that feels small but adds up massively. Fees, late fees, overdraft fees, service charges, subscription price hikes, processing fees. Poor and middle-income people pay more in fees than wealthy people because they live closer to zero. one timing mistake triggers penalties. One surprise expense causes overdrafts. One missed payment increases interest. Banks alone collect billions every year in overdraft fees. That's money taken almost entirely from people living paycheck to paycheck. Meanwhile, wealthy people earn interest instead of paying fees. So even the banking system quietly transfers money upward. And here's the part nobody wants to admit. The system needs people stuck. Debt keeps you working. Rent keeps you dependent. Healthcare tied to employment keeps you from quitting bad jobs. Low savings keeps you risk-averse. When people can't build stability, they can't bargain. They can't walk away. They can't slow down. They have to accept whatever pay and conditions they're offered. That's incredibly profitable for corporations. A financially stressed workforce is a compliant workforce. This is why even during record corporate profits, layoffs still happen. Stock prices rise when companies cut workers. Because investors benefit when labor costs drop. So while Gen Z struggles to afford rent, companies are posting their best quarters ever. That's not a coincidence. It's how modern capitalism is structured. Now stack all this together. High rent flowing to investors. Debt payments flow into lenders. Healthcare costs flow into corporations. Stagnant wages protecting profit margins. Asset appreciation enriching owners. Every month, money moves upward. Slowly, quietly, legally. And Gen Z feels like we're running on a treadmill that never stops. Working harder. Earning more on paper. But falling further behind in real life. This is why older advice doesn't work anymore. Just save. Just buy a house. Just invest. Those strategies assume an economy where wages rise with costs and assets are affordable. That world no longer exists. Now the economy is built around extracting as much as possible from regular people while concentrating wealth at the top, which is why reaching the middle class is no longer about effort. It's about access. Access to cheap housing. Access to assets. Access to family wealth. Access to low-interest capital. If you don't start with those, the climb becomes almost impossible. And in the final part, I'm going to break down what Gen Z can realistically do inside this system, how to avoid the worst traps, and how to build stability even when the math is stacked against us. Now, I want to be clear about something. This isn't one of those videos where we just point out everything that's broken and then leave you feeling hopeless. Because even though the math is stacked against us, there are still ways to survive inside this system and reduce how much it takes from you. Not to become ultra-rich overnight. Not to magically escape capitalism. But to stop bleeding money in the worst places and slowly build some stability. The first thing is banking. If your bank charges overdraft fees, maintenance fees, or random service charges, switch. There are tons of online banks and credit unions now that charge zero overdraft fees. Those fees alone cost low-income and middle-income people billions every year. Set up low balance alerts so you know before payments hit. And if you do get hit with a fee, call and ask for it to be reversed. Most banks will do it at least once. That alone can save hundreds a year. Next is debt. High-interest debt is one of the biggest wealth killers. If you have credit card debt, call your provider and ask for a lower rate. A lot of them will reduce it just to keep you as a customer. Look into balance transfer cards with 0% intro APR if you qualify. That buys you time to pay down the balance without interest eating you alive. Avoid payday loans at all costs. They're designed to trap people. For student loans, get on an income-based repayment plan if needed. It's not perfect, but it keeps payments manageable while you stabilize. Now let's talk about transportation. If you own a car, run the real numbers. Payment, insurance, gas, repairs, parking. In some cities, public transportation actually ends up cheaper, even if it takes longer. And if you do need a car, reliability matters more than looking nice. A cheaper car that constantly breaks down ends up costing way more. Housing is harder, but there are still strategies. Roommates aren't glamorous, but splitting rent is one of the fastest ways to free up cash. Even saving a few hundred a month changes everything long term. If you qualify for any housing assistance programs or wait lists, get on them early. Some lists take years. For food, meal prepping simple bulk meals saves a ridiculous amount of money. Rice, beans, chicken, frozen vegetables, eggs, oats. It's not exciting, but it works. Buying frozen produce instead of fresh is cheaper and just as nutritious. Use digital coupons. Shop sales. Those small savings add up over time. Now for saving and investing. If your job offers a 401k match, contribute enough to get the full match if you can. That's free money. Open a high-yield savings account instead of leaving money in a normal bank account that earns nothing. Even small emergency savings prevents debt when life hits. And if you can invest even $5 or $10 a week, start. The habit matters more than the amount at first. Now for healthcare. If you're uninsured, look into Medicaid or community health clinics. A lot of people qualify without realizing it. If you get a medical bill you can't afford, call the hospital billing department, ask for financial assistance or an itemized bill. Many times they'll lower it. There are also prescription discount programs that can dramatically reduce medication costs. None of this fixes the system, but it reduces how much the system takes from you. And that breathing room matters. Because when you're not constantly in survival mode, you can actually think long term. You can plan. You can learn skills. You can look for better opportunities. You can invest in yourself. And that's how real progress happens. I also want to say this clearly. If you're struggling right now, it's not because you failed. You didn't mess up. You didn't misunderstand adulthood. You entered an economy that changed the rules without telling anyone. Our parents and grandparents weren't lying when they gave advice. The world they grew up in genuinely worked differently. Wages rose. Housing was affordable. College was cheaper. Healthcare didn't bankrupt people. Assets were reachable. The middle class was real. Gen Z is living in a version of the economy where everything got more expensive and almost nothing got easier. That's not laziness. That's math. And until we stop blaming individuals and start acknowledging how the system actually works, nothing will change. But in the meantime, we still have to survive in it. Reduce the traps. Protect your money. Build stability slowly. And don't beat yourself up for struggling in a system designed to extract from you. If this video helped you understand what's really going on, I'd love to hear your experience in the comments. What's the biggest thing draining your money right now? Rent? Debt? Healthcare? Food? Talk to your younger self in the comments and share anything you've learned that could help someone else. That's the community I'm trying to build here. People helping each other navigate a broken system instead of pretending everything is fine. And if you found this useful, hitting like and subscribing genuinely helps this channel reach more people who need to hear this. I'm going to keep breaking down the real economic reality Gen Z is facing with actual numbers and real-life examples. Because understanding the system is the first step to surviving it. Thanks for watching. I'll talk to you soon.